Hello everybody, Brian Nunez, the brand manager for Losi here, and in today's video we're going to go through the process of installing your front and your rear carbon fiber shock towers. Per usual, one of the first things you're going to want to do is just remove the rear body. You kind of flex the rear body to go around the gear cover, and then it'll just slide right out. We'll set this aside. Now, for the entire mini platform, really you only need these 5 critical tools. Needle nose pliers, a 1.5mm hex wrench, a 2mm hex wrench, a 4mm hex driver or nut driver, and a 5.5mm nut driver. So we're going to start with the front. That's a little bit of the easier one to do. And we're going to start off by removing just the top shocks from the shock tower. You do that by simply grabbing your needle nose pliers, that 4mm nut driver that I mentioned. Use your pliers to hold on to the back nut and remove the front nut. We'll take off this nut. These are small parts here, so depending on your size, you might need to be a little patient, but there's one, and the shock just simply slides off like that. Repeat the process for the other side. There you go. And now, as you can see, the shocks come right out. The next step is going to be removing the front shock tower by using these 4 bolts, taking those off. That's going to be your 1.5mm wrench. All right, and as I am removing this final screw, the tower will come off with it. Now the next step is to get the actual shock studs, or the standoffs, off of this tower and put them on the new tower. Same thing, needle nose pliers, grab hold of the nut, 4mm here, and unscrew that. These are the same size, so no worry there about getting them mixed up. Jump over to the other side. Put that away. Now these should slide out pretty good. Oh, sorry, that's the actual shock bushing there. We can get rid of those, no big deal. And these probably will require a little bit of turning as well. There's one. And if needed, you could also just use this as well. So that's an option. So now we'll put that aside. Now here's your shock tower. It's important to note that there is a front side. You can see that it's actually recessed a bit there for the screws to go into, versus the back is flat. So make sure that you install this with this facing the front, meaning that this stud is actually going to go this way, so that the shock goes in from the front. So the assembly is just like the disassembly. We'll hold this here and we'll go ahead and start applying or putting our nuts on. Here we go. And I like to kind of just get them started, and then I'll actually go back in with the actual tool. So just to note that the standoff does have a short side and a long side. The short side is what goes into the actual tower. One of the features and benefits of carbon towers is not only that they're lighter and they're stronger, but also you get more options for mounting your shocks. In other words, you can change the angle of the shocks, which changes the handling characteristics of your vehicle. So now that these are on, we'll go ahead and secure these onto the tower. Looks like this one wants to cross thread itself. There we go, now we're good. And then I will grab my needle nose pliers, grab that standoff. And none of this stuff has to be super tight. What I like to do is just use 2 fingers on the actual wrench itself, like so, and kind of whatever force I can put on the wrench, that's good enough. No need to get in here and torque it down too much. Now those are installed, we'll grab our bushings, insert those back, grab the car, and the process is the same. Grab your screws, grab your wrench, and start the install. Now, one tip that I have for you is never tighten one side completely down. Leave it a little bit loose so it gives you some wiggle room as you put on the other screws. Once all the screws are on, then you can go ahead and use some type of a H pattern or a star pattern to slowly tighten all these down. So now that my last screw is in, I'll lightly snug that up and use an H pattern or an X pattern. I'm going across to the top, then to the other side, and slowly snug these up so that I know those parts are going in there the right way and are going to be laying down flat the way they're intended to be. So the last and final step is to grab your shocks, grab your shock nuts. Might be easier just to put these in the tool itself and go ahead and apply those. Now, one tip that I have for you when installing any shock is to make sure that you don't over tighten these top nuts. If you do, you end up mushrooming that bushing, which expands it and traps the cap on and will affect the handling of your vehicle. When we install the aluminum versions of these shocks, we'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but that's for another video. So there you have it. There's your front carbon shock tower. So now that we've completed the front tower, let's move on to the rear. To make life a little bit easier on yourself, go ahead and remove the rear wing as the first step. It's going to make it a little bit easier to get to all the screws. All right, and there is one bolt. I'm so used to calling these bolts from real cars. Screws is what I should be saying. All right. There's that. Move over to the other side. Perfect. We'll set that aside. Now we have clear access to our shock tower. Similar to the front, we'll start with removing the shocks. Grab hold of the nut. Set that aside. Move the shocks out of the way, like so. Now, what we can do is, now I can turn this car over, grab hold of the shock stud itself, or the standoff, remove that 4mm nut, jump over to the other side, I wanted to come out easier than I thought. I'll re-thread it into here just to kind of give me something to pull that nut out, just like that. The same for the other side, and there you go. Now we'll go ahead and remove the rear shock tower. Back to the 1.5mm, there's actually 4 bolts coming straight from the top side. Here's an example of the 2 bolts there, side by side from the top. Same thing with the rear. The rear is at a bit of an angle, sitting right behind the wing mount, but that's okay. You can flex that wing mount a little bit out of the way. So I'll just kind of use my fingers here to kind of move that over, make sure that my tool is properly going into the screw, and screw it out. And that should allow the rear shock tower to come off as one unit. Now, one thing you'll notice here is that since this is an inject molded piece, there's kind of this feature naturally built into the actual injection molded piece. Since the shock tower in the rear is flat, we actually include this completely new and independent piece that's supposed to work with this carbon tower in order for you to mount this to your gearbox. Before we get to that step, let's remove the rear wing mount. Those are 2 screws here. And it looks like these are the same exact size as the 4 bolts or 4 screws used to take off the tower. No need to keep those separate. And taking this off now, our wing mount should come off, just like so. And now we can move this part we'll no longer need, but handy to keep just in case you break one at a race or something. You can always have at least your plastic to resort back to. And similar to the front shock tower, you'll see that one side is recessed on these 2 bolts, and the other side has all of them recessed. This is the side that all the bolts come in from. So this side is actually meant to just use those 2 little bosses there. So those are going to get installed like so, using the same 2 exact screws to put it all back together. And again, making sure to leave that a little bit loose until you completely secure the other side. That's just something to do. Good practice. Push that wing mount into the carbon tower. Those bosses lock themselves into place. Now, as you can see, the recesses are in the right spot. And a key thing is that this kit comes with 4 bolts in order to attach these 2 pieces together. So we'll go ahead and do that next. All right. Again, as I'm installing these, I'm not fully tightening them down just yet until all the screws have been put into place, and then you go in and use a nice cross pattern to make sure that part lays down nice and flat. Using a star pattern, often referred to as an H pattern. And now your rear carbon shock tower is attached to the bulkhead. Next step is to go ahead and start installing your shock studs. Again, just as a reminder, one side of the stud is longer than the other. The side that is longer is the side that the shock goes on. So in case you drop this and you don't know what side it goes on the longer end. The shocks are going to come in from this direction. I'll put this in the innermost hole for now. Grab my 4mm, insert my nut, and go ahead and install that. Once that's started, I will move on to the other side. Grab a hold of that standoff and give those a proper snug. Move over to the other side. Bam. Now that you have your complete rear shock tower assembly, you go ahead, and it's quite simple. Move your shocks out of the way, and it just pops in just like so. Now you're ready to reinstall the bolts to hold that assembly into the rear case. Kind of using my finger to guide that screw in. Now that it's started, it will find its home and kind of start driving its way down. All right, last one here before we go around and snug them all up. All right, last one here before we go around and snug them all up. Again, using my finger to kind of guide the head of that bolt into the center of the car. Once you go ahead and get it started, it'll find its home. All right, and I'm going to start by snugging this down. Now again, using kind of a cross pattern, and bam. Last and final step is to reinstall your shocks. Simple as just sliding those over the bushings there. Position yourself to be nice and comfortable to install those. Grab these here. And just like the front, you want to make sure to not over tighten these. If not, you'll mushroom that bushing and actually cause the rear shock to bind. All right, you can feel that. Just the bottom there. Our rear shock tower and our front tower are installed. Now the last step is just to reinstall your wing. Put those screws back in, line those up, 1.5 millimeter. And then we'll pop the wing underneath the nuts, like so. Make sure this is all secure and going in. I think that's good. That's good. And there you have it. If you're interested in any of the other option parts we offer for the Mini T or the Mini B, be sure to jump on Losi.com and then our Losi YouTube channel for the instructions on how to install them. Thanks guys, we'll see you in the next one.